Vanessa Harrington had always dreamed of owning her own bakery. Ever since she was a little girl, watching her grandmother knead dough in their small kitchen, she had been fascinated by the art of baking. The warmth of the oven, the sweet scent of freshly baked bread, and the joy of seeing people smile after taking a bite of her creations, it was more than just a passion, it was her calling. But chasing dreams was never easy. Leaving her small hometown behind, Vanessa moved to Philadelphia, a city full of opportunities but also challenges. The moment she stepped off the bus, suitcase in hand, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The towering buildings, the constant hum of traffic, and the hurried pace of city life were overwhelming, yet she knew this was where she needed to be. At first, life in Philadelphia was difficult. Finding an affordable place to live, securing a stable job, and saving money for her bakery seemed like an impossible task. She took on long shifts at a local cafe, waking up before dawn to prepare pastries, then spending her evenings researching locations, suppliers, and business strategies. There were nights when exhaustion threatened to break her spirit, when self-doubt whispered in her ear, making her question whether she had made the right decision. But Vanessa was not someone who gave up easily. Every challenge she faced only strengthened her determination. She reminded herself of the promise she had made, to create a space where people could gather, enjoy her pastries, and feel the same warmth she had felt in her grandmother's kitchen. One evening, as she walked past a small vacant shop with a "for rent" sign in the window, her heart raced. She pressed her hands against the glass, imagining the shelves filled with fresh bread, the sound of laughter from happy customers, and the scent of vanilla and cinnamon filling the air. This was it. The first step toward making her dream a reality. With renewed determination, Vanessa took a deep breath and smiled to herself. The road ahead would not be easy, but she was ready. Her dream was no longer just a distant hope, it was something she would fight for, step by step, until it became real. The night was cold, and rain poured relentlessly, soaking Lucas's jacket as he walked through the dimly lit alley. The shortcut home had always been a quiet path, but tonight, an eerie silence settled over it, broken only by the rhythmic dripping of water from rusted fire escapes. He pulled his collar up against the chill, his breath visible in the damp air. As he turned the corner, he froze. Under the weak glow of a flickering streetlight stood a man, cloaked in a long, dark coat. His face was mostly hidden by the hood he wore, but something about the way he stood, rigid and unmoving, sent a shiver down Lucas's spine. The man's gaze locked onto him with an intensity that made Lucas's stomach tighten. It felt as if he had been waiting for him. Lucas hesitated. A strange mix of curiosity and unease coursed through him. His instincts told him to turn around and leave, but something kept him rooted in place. He swallowed hard before taking a cautious step forward. "Excuse me," Lucas called out, his voice steady despite the nervous energy thrumming through him. "Do you need help?" The man didn't respond. Instead, he slowly reached into his coat. Lucas tensed, his muscles coiling in anticipation. Was this man dangerous? Was he armed? But instead of a weapon, the stranger pulled out a small, weathered envelope. His hand trembled slightly as he extended it toward Lucas. Lucas hesitated. Every rational thought screamed at him not to take it, but the way the man's fingers twitched, as if desperate to pass it on, made him reach out. As soon as his fingertips brushed the rough paper, the man leaned in slightly and whispered in a voice barely above the sound of the rain. "They're watching. Be careful." Before Lucas could react, the man turned on his heel and disappeared into the shadows of the alley. Lucas blinked, his heart pounding. He spun around, searching for any sign of him, but the stranger was gone, as if he had never been there. The only thing left was the mysterious envelope in Lucas's shaking hand and the unsettling feeling creeping up his spine. Interrogated by the police. Lucas had barely taken a step forward when a sharp wail of sirens cut through the air. Red and blue lights flashed against the wet pavement, and within seconds, a police car screeched to a stop in front of him. His pulse spiked as two officers leaped out, their hands hovering over their holsters. "Hands where we can see them," one of them barked. Lucas's breath caught in his throat. His instincts screamed at him to explain, to protest, but his body reacted first. He slowly lifted his hands, the envelope still clutched between his fingers. "Drop it," the officer snapped. Lucas hesitated before releasing the envelope, watching as it fluttered to the ground. One of the officers quickly snatched it up, his eyes narrowing as he examined the worn paper. He turned to Lucas, his expression unreadable. "Where did you get this?" "A man gave it to me," Lucas answered truthfully, trying to steady his voice. "I don't know who he was. He just handed it to me and walked away." The officers exchanged a glance. Lucas could see the tension in their stances, the way their fingers twitched near their belts. They knew something he didn't. "You need to come with us," one of them finally said, stepping forward. "What? Wait, I didn't do anything," Lucas protested, stepping back instinctively. "I don't even know what's in that envelope." But they weren't listening. Strong hands grabbed his arms, pinning them behind his back as cold metal cuffs clicked around his wrists. Panic flared in his chest. "Please," he tried again, his voice laced with desperation. "This is a mistake." They didn't respond. The car door opened, and Lucas was pushed inside. The ride to the station was a blur, his thoughts racing as he tried to piece together what had just happened. The man in the alley. The envelope. The warning. Now, seated in a stark interrogation room under the harsh glare of a fluorescent light, Lucas felt a deep sense of unease settle in his gut. The officer across from him placed the envelope on the table but didn't open it. Instead, he studied Lucas with a scrutinizing gaze. "Tell us everything you know," the officer said, his voice calm but firm. Lucas took a shaky breath. "I already told you, I don't know anything." But something told him that whatever was inside that envelope was bigger than him. And somehow, he was now right in the middle of it. Lucas sat stiffly in the interrogation room, his pulse hammering in his ears. The harsh fluorescent light above cast a stark glow on the metal table, emphasizing the tension that hung thick in the air. Across from him, the officer, his badge gleaming under the artificial light, studied him with an unreadable expression. Lucas could feel the weight of suspicion pressing down on him. His fingers curled into fists beneath the table, his nails digging into his palms. He had told his story multiple times, but it felt like they weren't listening, like they had already made up their minds. "I already told you everything," Lucas said, his voice tight with frustration. "I don't even know what's in that envelope. Some guy handed it to me out of nowhere, and the next thing I know, I'm being stopped by the cops." The officer leaned forward slightly, his sharp eyes locking onto Lucas. "And yet, you just happened to be at the scene of a reported crime. That's quite a coincidence, don't you think?" His tone was laced with skepticism. Lucas exhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. "Check the security cameras. Look at my phone records. I was at work. I have people who can confirm it. I don't even know what this is about." The officer didn't react immediately. Instead, he exchanged a glance with the junior officer standing near the door, then nodded. "All right. We'll check." His voice was neutral, but something about his demeanor told Lucas that they weren't ready to let him go just yet. The junior officer exited the room, leaving Lucas alone with the lead investigator. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lucas shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his mind racing. What if they didn't believe him? What if the evidence wasn't enough? He had heard stories, people getting locked up for things they didn't do. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay composed. He had done nothing wrong. He just had to wait. But waiting, he realized, was the hardest part. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Lucas' patience was wearing thin. He had gone from feeling anxious to downright furious. How long were they going to keep him here? He had done nothing wrong, yet they were treating him like a criminal. Finally, the door creaked open, and the officer re-entered, a thick file in his hands. Lucas sat up straighter, searching the man's face for any sign of an answer. The officer set the file down and opened it, flipping through a few pages before speaking. "Your story checks out," he admitted, though his tone lacked any real apology. "Security footage confirms you were at work when the crime occurred. Your phone records place you exactly where you said you were. And witnesses confirmed your timeline." Lucas felt a wave of relief crash over him, but it was short-lived. His jaw tightened, his hands balling into fists once more. "So that's it?" he asked, his voice thick with frustration. "You pull me in, interrogate me for hours, and now you're just letting me go? Like nothing happened?" The officer's expression remained neutral. He picked up the envelope that had caused all this trouble and slid it across the table toward Lucas. "You're free to go. But take my advice, be careful who hands you things on the street. You might not be so lucky next time." Lucas hesitated before picking up the envelope. It felt heavier now, as if it carried more than just paper inside. He wasn't sure if he wanted to open it or throw it away. One thing was clear, he had just been dragged into something much bigger than he realized. As he stepped out of the police station and into the cool night air, his mind raced. He was free, but something told him this wasn't over. Whatever was inside that envelope had turned him into a suspect. And he had no idea why. Lucas sat in the cold, dimly lit interrogation room, his hands clenched into fists on the metal table. The weight of the past few hours pressed heavily on his chest. He had been dragged in, questioned relentlessly, and treated like a criminal, all for a crime he didn't commit. Frustration simmered beneath his skin, but he forced himself to stay calm. Losing his temper wouldn't help his case. The door creaked open. For a split second, Lucas braced himself for another round of interrogation. But instead of the officer, a woman walked in, her presence commanding immediate attention. She was dressed in a fitted navy blue suit, her dark hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail. There was an air of authority about her, a quiet but undeniable confidence in the way she carried herself. She wasn't here to ask questions, she was here to take control. She set a leather folder on the table and met Lucas's eyes with a steady gaze. "I'm Evelyn Carter, your attorney," she said, her voice calm but firm. "And this interrogation is over." Lucas blinked. "You're my lawyer?" He hadn't expected anyone to come. "That's right," she said, taking a seat across from him. "And you're getting out of here." The officer standing near the door shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, we're still conducting our investigation." Evelyn turned her head sharply. "No, you're not. You're holding my client without evidence. That ends now." She pulled out a file and slid it across the table. "Lucas has a solid alibi, which I assume you've conveniently ignored. No fingerprints, no direct connection to the crime scene, nothing. Keeping him here any longer is a violation of his rights." The officer hesitated, glancing at his superior, but Evelyn didn't let up. "You have two choices," she continued, her voice unwavering. "Either you let him walk out of here now, or I file a complaint for unlawful detention and make sure this department answers for it." Lucas watched as the officer's jaw tightened. A tense silence stretched between them before the officer let out a frustrated sigh and muttered, "Fine. He's free to go." Relief flooded Lucas's body as the handcuffs were unlocked from his wrists. He rubbed them absent-mindedly, feeling the sting of where the metal had pressed into his skin for hours. Evelyn stood and motioned for him to follow. "Let's go," she said. Lucas didn't need to be told twice. He pushed back his chair and followed her out, every step feeling lighter than the last. As soon as they stepped outside the police station, he inhaled deeply, the crisp night air feeling like freedom itself. He turned to Evelyn. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," she said. "But we're not done yet, Lucas. Someone framed you, and we need to find out why." Lucas's stomach twisted at the thought. He had just escaped one nightmare, but another was only beginning. The next morning, Lucas sat in Evelyn's sleek, modern office. Sunlight streamed in through the tall windows, but despite the warmth of the room, a cold tension lingered between them. Evelyn was flipping through a thick file, her expression unreadable as she studied the contents. Lucas's heart pounded. So? What did you find? Evelyn didn't look up. Instead, she slid a document across the desk. Lucas picked it up, his eyes scanning the text. His name was there, circled in bold red ink. But it wasn't just his name. There were reports, phone records, even an anonymous tip-off that had led to his arrest. Then, Evelyn placed a photograph on top of the papers. Lucas froze. The face staring back at him was familiar, though he hadn't paid much attention to the man before. Michael Hayes. A name that meant little to him, until now. He set me up? Lucas asked, his voice tight. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. It looks that way. He was the one who tipped off the police, planting evidence to make it look like you were involved. And guess what? He stands to gain a lot from you being out of the way. Lucas clenched his fists, anger rising in his chest. But why? I don't even know him that well. Evelyn tapped a finger against the file. That's what we need to figure out. But what I do know is that whoever framed you wasn't acting alone. Someone wanted you out of the picture, and they were willing to go to extreme lengths to make it happen. Lucas exhaled sharply, his mind racing. A day ago, he had been a free man. Now, he was caught in a web of lies and deception, with no choice but to fight his way out. He met Evelyn's gaze, his determination hardening. Then let's find out the truth. Evelyn nodded. We will. But be ready, Lucas, this is only the beginning. The day of the trial was finally here. The weight of it all settled heavily on Lucas's shoulders as he walked into the courthouse. Each step echoed in his mind, amplifying his nervousness. The months of uncertainty, of being trapped in the suffocating grip of false accusations, had taken their toll. Today, he would face the culmination of everything, the truth, or what he feared might be a continuation of the nightmare. His mind flickered between hope and doubt. He had put his trust in Evelyn, his brilliant defense attorney, but still, a gnawing fear lingered. What if the prosecution found a way to twist the evidence? What if the jury didn't believe in his innocence? He had been the target of so many lies, and now, in this moment, he could only rely on the truth he knew in his heart. As the trial began, the courtroom felt like an arena, with the prosecutor across from him, sharpening his words like weapons. Every accusation seemed to pierce Lucas's soul, but he fought to keep his composure. He couldn't show weakness now. Not when everything was on the line. Evelyn was a beacon of clarity amidst the chaos. She spoke with such precision, countering every claim, turning their arguments back on the prosecution with surgical skill. Her voice, calm but firm, reassured Lucas as she dismantled the case against him piece by piece. There were witnesses who had seen him at another location during the crime, phone records, and, most crucially, evidence proving the falsification of the accusations. But even with all the evidence in his favor, Lucas's heart raced. It felt as though time had slowed down, the air thick with tension. How could he fully believe in this? How could he shake the doubt that had haunted him for so long? Then came the moment, the verdict. The judge's voice echoed in the courtroom. Not guilty. For a brief second, Lucas didn't register the words. It was as though his body froze, unable to process the magnitude of the moment. His mind raced to catch up with the sound of the judge's gavel hitting the desk. The room exploded into noise, the media, the onlookers, the lawyers, everyone in the courtroom seemed to blur into a cacophony of celebration and disbelief. For a moment, Lucas was still. He had won. He was free. He turned to Evelyn, his eyes wide with gratitude, his chest tight with a release of breath he hadn't realized he was holding. She smiled at him, her expression a mixture of relief and pride. They had done it. She had done it. As the courtroom emptied, reporters surged toward him, microphones thrust into his face, flashing lights blinding him. It felt surreal. One moment, he had been the accused, the next, he was a symbol of victory against an unjust system. News of the trial's outcome rippled through the city like an unstoppable wave. People were in shock. Rumors had spread like wildfire before, and now, with the truth finally revealed, the implications were enormous. Wrongfully accused man freed, legal victory shakes the justice system, one headline read. Another, city in shock as Lucas's innocence is proven in court. For the first time in weeks, Lucas didn't feel like the villain. He wasn't the man everyone whispered about on the streets, the man whose name had been dragged through the mud. Instead, he was the man who had survived, who had fought back, and won. The realization was both freeing and unsettling. But the reactions weren't all positive. As the media flooded the streets, some people still looked at him with suspicion. They couldn't erase the image of the accused man, the man caught up in a scandal that had dominated headlines for months. Despite his acquittal, the stain of doubt would linger. People's perceptions were hard to change, especially when the media had spent so long building an image of guilt around him. Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that some would never fully accept his innocence. He had spent so much time trying to prove himself to the world that now, he found himself questioning what it meant to truly be free. The public's gaze, though no longer accusing, felt heavy. But there was one undeniable truth: his name had been cleared. And the system that had once sought to destroy him was now exposed as flawed, manipulated by those with power. The victory felt hollow in some ways, knowing that the fight wasn't just about clearing his name, but about uncovering the greater conspiracy that had set him up. Lucas had barely stepped out of the courthouse when Evelyn's hand rested on his shoulder, grounding him. "You did it," she said quietly, her voice still firm, despite the softening in her expression. "But this isn't over. We need to dig deeper." Lucas nodded slowly. He knew she was right. As much as he wanted to savor the sweet taste of freedom, there was something more important at stake. The people who had orchestrated his downfall, who had worked tirelessly to ruin his life, were still out there. And now, they knew that he had the power to fight back. "What now?" he asked, his voice low, but filled with resolve. "We don't stop here. We track them down, find out who was behind this, and make sure they pay for what they did to you, and to the system." Evelyn's words burned with determination. She was no longer just his lawyer. She was a partner in this fight, a guiding light through the darkness. Lucas clenched his fists at his sides. He was no longer a man beaten down by false accusations. He was a man with a purpose. His name had been cleared, but the fight for justice was far from over. The city buzzed with the aftermath of the trial, but for Lucas, the real battle had just begun. He would uncover the truth. He would expose the ones who had tried to destroy him. And he wouldn't rest until he had finished what had been started. There was more at stake now than just his own innocence. It was about exposing the cracks in the system, about ensuring no one else would fall victim to the same corrupt forces that had tried to silence him. As he and Evelyn walked away from the courthouse, the road ahead was uncertain, but Lucas felt a surge of purpose. He wasn't just a victim of circumstance. He was a man with a mission. And this journey, however long and difficult it might be, was one he was ready to face head-on.